Hey everyone, welcome to part 2. In this part, we'll tackle the background and complete the entire page. We won't be drawing anything too complicated, but this will be a bit of a challenging project since we're using mixed media. And yes, that includes water, which can be a little risky. There will be some ugly stages where you might question what you're doing, but I'll guide you step by step explaining how and why I make each choice. By the end, you'll see that it's not as scary as it seems, and hopefully it won't look too bad either. What I always hope is that this inspires you to try something similar on other pages as well. I know many colorists feel intimidated by backgrounds and expanding illustrations in their own way. I used to feel the same way when I first started, so I completely understand if you're hesitant, but if that's the case, feel free to just watch and decide later if it's something you'd like to try too. I started with a simple sketch. It's very light, so it might be hard to see, but that helps me adjust things easily, as drawing doesn't come natural to me. Here we're extending Leila's drawing by copying her objects to keep consistency. I'll add the same mushrooms and berries in other areas to balance the composition. Even at this stage, it's important to think about color placement. For example, we don't want too much red on one side. I'll also add some basic tree shapes in the background to see if everything looks right before we start coloring. As soon as I start coloring the background like this, I immediately enter the ugly stage. I recommend watching this part to see if this medium will work for you. Remember, you can achieve a similar look with regular pencils. I tried using watercolors on this paper before, but it didn't work too well. Since we have a large area to cover and I'm quite impatient, I'll use watercolor pencils. They're easier to control, require less water, and still let you quickly see if something needs adjusting. I want a colorful page, so I'll start with a quick base layer. We're just laying down the foundation. With mixed media, we can always recolor, but be sure not to press too hard to avoid unwanted lines. As for the exact colors I'm using, I don't have the name, sorry about that. Any browns, orange colors, and a bit of turquoise will work. Just go with what looks good to you. There won't be a big difference, and feel free to mix them in some areas. I'm using a flat brush. It's important not to use one that's too small, as it will require working on the paper for too long, which can get messy. On the other hand, don't use a brush that's too big, as it will be difficult to avoid areas like leaves and berries. Dip the brush in water, then use a paper towel to dry it slightly. There shouldn't be too much water, just enough to spread and blend the colors easily. Test it on a small area first and remember not to work too long in one spot. I follow a rule of 3 to 5 seconds maximum per section. Keep a paper towel in your hand to wipe the brush if it becomes difficult to control, but continue working on the blank areas until the colors fade smoothly. Then just stop. Don't go over that area while it's still wet. The paper could get damaged and it might cause you to panic. So let it dry, be patient, and see how it looks once dry. Then we can start adding color to other sections. I like to mix pencils on areas like this because the colors blend beautifully in some spots. Remember, this is where you have to trust the process. It might not look great at first, but this is just the base. Imagine the mushrooms in a blue magical forest, so I'm going to add some distant trees. We'll use watercolor pencils for this part as well. The trees should stand tall, but we won't be drawing every detail. First, I'll lightly sketch the shapes with a pencil and then use watercolor pencils to roughly color them in with blues. I'll mix darker blue, green, brown and black on the trees and then use water carefully with a flat brush. Again, this process might look rough at first, but we will recolor and refine it once we see the initial main shapes. This will help us visualize the final picture, what shapes we want to emphasize and what needs to be adjusted. When using water, don't rush. Practice shaping the trees with your brush and blending the colors smoothly to see how they interact. Once you're done with the first layer of watercolor pencils, make sure everything is completely dry. With this technique, there shouldn't be any bleed through to the other side. The paper might wrinkle slightly, which is normal, but it will flatten out a bit once the coloring is finished. To create a sense of depth on one page, I'll add some visible leaves in the background as well. Even though I've already done the background, I can still erase parts of the first layer to shape the leaves. They should be a bit blurry and not too detailed, which will work well for adding a lighter color here. Now that we have a rough idea of how the overall page might look, we can start finishing it and focusing on key areas. I'll begin around the darker parts. When coloring areas that aren't the main focus, it's important to decide which parts to highlight and which to darken or blend away. I tend to color quickly, often stepping back to see how it affects the entire page. I'm not a perfectionist with color pencils. I'm far too impatient for that. My strokes are fast and I'm always mindful of how colors interact across the whole page. If you enjoy taking your time to build up layers slowly, feel free to do so. It will likely make the result even nicer. It's important to recognize what kind of colorist you are. For me, if I linger too long on one section, I lose interest. Seeing the immediate impact of colors keeps me motivated to finish. Some colorists take their time making their work smooth and well blended, which can be very satisfying in the end. Whatever approach keeps you engaged and happy, that's the one you should go with. As I move from right to left, my turquoise colors will become lighter. Switch to whichever pencils will help achieve a bluish turquoise background with the light source on the left side. Be sure to add some browns to the trees to create contrast with the blue distance, but keep the details minimal. The tree trunks should be visible yet still slightly blurry. Now we need to fill in the foreground. I'm using a red pen to draw berries similar to the ones we've already colored, making sure to leave a bit of white for highlights. This is just a rough sketch as I plan to color over the berries with colored pencils to make them look more vibrant and polished. Try to replicate the look of the berries Leila drew, but as they get closer to the foreground, you can make them slightly larger for perspective. When coloring the berries, use darker shades of red for the shadows and the darker parts. Sometimes even a hint of brown can be helpful. For areas closer to the highlights, use warmer and lighter shades of red, such as oranges and yellows, leaving a small white dot for a nice shine. Shadows help create a 3D effect, making the objects look more alive. In a magical setting, I like to make shadows darker, sometimes even playing with complementary colors to add an accent to their vibrancy. When I color parts of the background, the lines become more subtle and the details less visible, so we don't have to focus on everything. Since I often switch colors and enjoy mixing them, feel free to color in your own way if that feels less overwhelming. The brown or blue shades don't have to match exactly what I'm using. While I mentioned the specific pencils I use for most parts, I encourage you to observe the colors and try to match them as you see them. You can even get creative and change things up if you have other ideas. At this stage, we've established the color palette and I'm now just repeating the pencils while focusing more on the overall color composition. We still have space in the foreground to fill in, so I'm going to add tree roots and little details. This may not be the best perspective or positioning, but this is my fantasy land and it will grow the way I envision it. That's perfectly fine. Little mistakes are completely acceptable, and if you're someone who always strives to do your best and improve, you likely learn the most from these moments. I didn't have enough patience to draw as carefully as I would have liked, but I'll aim to do better next time. I won't specify the exact brown pencils I'm using as I find it unnecessary. Instead, just use a combination of beige and dark brown, along with warmer browns that have red or yellowish tones, perhaps the ones you used on the mushrooms. Wood isn't very smooth and has a texture, so I won't try to color it too smoothly or blend too much. Instead, I'll play with the pencils and alternate them to create wavy shapes, making the overall effect more interesting. Now that we have the final look, it's all about the details and deciding when to stop adding those finishing touches. This is actually one of my favorite parts. I like to step back for a moment and observe the coloring, asking myself if there's anything I would add and whether it would make a difference. Ultimately, it's up to you. Feel free to do what you like. You can blur some parts you don't need or sharpen the important ones, and you can add more vibrant colors to highlight specific objects. We're going to focus on small details like leaves. Add highlights and use a white pencil where the leaf catches the light, while using darker shades to downplay areas we don't want to emphasize. We'll also incorporate more trees into the background, ensuring they're not too prominent with clear lines. Instead, they should blend into the background. To give them a distant appearance, make them thinner as well. You can use black or dark blue for this, but do it very lightly to create just the shapes. Let's finish the trees, as that's all we have left. I'll start by defining the small shapes and adding a few light branches, as these should appear distant. Use a mix of browns and earthy greens for the trees with a touch of turquoise on the sides. Trees that are closer can have visible holes and bark details. Work very lightly And once you're satisfied with how it looks, go ahead and blend everything together until you achieve the desired shapes and appearance. Now I'm going to add distant leaves, but I'm really not in the mood to place them one by one. Since I like to color in detail, I need to find a quicker way to create tiny leaves in the background. This is where a fan brush comes in handy. I have several sizes and I'm using the smallest one to apply the watercolors. I'm quite pleased with how it looks so far. I'm trying to cluster the leaves in lighter blues with a touch of darker greens on top to see how it turns out. You don't have to do this if you're not into it. I just thought the woods looked a bit flat and that leaves would add depth. Alternately, you could use a pointed round brush to create very small dots that resemble leaves. This method might take a bit longer, but it can be easier to control. If you have a fan brush, I recommend testing it on a scrap piece of paper first to see how it works for you before applying it in your book. paint, I'm going to make the caps of the mushrooms more vibrant with reds and yellows because I think it enhances the overall look. However, feel free to add whatever you like. I also added a few hanging leaves using acrylic paint and recolored some areas with pencils. And we're done. I hope you enjoyed the video. I know I can get a bit messy with all the exchanging of pencils and mediums, but my goal is to show you the many options available for coloring in a coloring book. This will help you become more experienced and confident when tackling other projects or pages. I hope watching me explore different mixed media techniques to create a semi-painting inspires you and reminds you that creativity can flourish if we dare to experiment and have fun. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments, and I'll do my best to respond whenever I can. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and follow for more content. Your support makes it easier for me to create future videos. See you soon and happy coloring!